this is RadTechShoe, and it has been a long time, yes indeed, since I posted some Battleborn content, so here we are with another character review, and in this time we are going to be tackling the last member of the UPR faction. It is Captain Ghalt. We are going to be going over his basic skill setup, his Helix Loadout, his lore and backstory, and I'll go over some tips and tricks that I've found to use Ghalt on the battlefield as effectively as possible. So let's get right into his skill setup. Ghalt's first skill is called the hook. He throws out a hook and it latches onto enemies and it pulls them right in front of Ghalt. This can be very useful, but also I've noticed it's kind of glitchy. Sometimes it pulls enemies behind Ghalt, but you know, Gearbox has definitely made some adjustments to that and has tried to reduce the frequency of that. However, bear in mind the hook innately deals no damage. It just simply grabs them and pulls them in. His second skill is Scrap Trap. Ghalt will throw this little trap, this little mine on the ground, and it stuns enemies for roughly 2 seconds and deals them a little bit of damage, and you can have up to 2 traps out on the field. Now, Scrap Trap is what Ghalt revolves around, and we'll get more into that later towards the end of the video, but just bear in mind, Scrap Trap, his entire game plan revolves around Scrap Trap. His ultimate is called Dual Wield. Ghalt will pull out a second shotgun, and for the next 10 seconds, he'll fire both one at a time real fast, and deal fairly decent damage. Although, to be fair, this is one of my least favorite ultimates in the game. I just don't like it. His passive ability is called Tactical Shells. Ghalt's basic shotgun fires 8 shells, but the last 4 of each series deal an additional 25 bonus damage. So the first 4 deal regular damage, the last 4 deal bonus 25% more damage. Pretty useful, fairly good, and we can also augment them to be even more effective later on. And that's really all it is for Ghalt's skill loadout. It's pretty simple, the Scrap Trap, the hook, dual wield, and just tactical shells with his 8-round revolver shotgun. Now we're going to get into his lore and backstory. So now the first thing you need to know about Ghalt is he is a captain of the UPR, the United Peacekeeping Republic. However, he's a former captain. He has resigned his post in order to devote every last minute of his time left alive to fighting off the Varelsi. The UPR, for some reason, don't identify the Varelsi as the most prominent threat in the universe. For some reason, the UPR don't unite against the Varelsi, so Ghalt has resigned and he has decided, you know what, I'll fight them. And he has also decided that if he's going to save Solus and fight off the Varelsi, that he needs help. He's going to need the help, so he contacts other people like Malka from the Eldred, Cleese from the LLC. He definitely knows some people in the UPR like Montana and Oscar Mike. He's also personally affiliated with Reyna from the Rogue faction. They have a history with one another. However, he knows that he needs everyone to come together to fight this. He's lost several stars, including Panark. Panark was definitely a tough loss for him. Panark was the closest that they had ever come to actually successfully fending off the Varelsis. Panark was the second to last star, obviously right next to Solus. And the battle lasted for over 100 days, and when everyone worked together and cooperated and had each other's backs, things just seemed to work. However, Panark was inevitably lost, and that was a tough loss, but Ghalt saw the light in the dark on that, pardon the pun, but he saw that they can be beaten. He knows the Varelsi can be defeated. He knows it. He knows that if they get more help from all the factions, including the Generate Empire, he will definitely be able to successfully fight off the Varelsi. So he calls in some aides from the UPR, and at one point even the one of the generals of the UPR actually sends in a message. There's a general that sends a message to the Chancellor Victoria Shields, which is obviously the Chancellor of the UPR, and Ghalt has technically gone AWOL. I don't think he was successfully or, went through the right processes of being discharged from the UPR. I think he just said, I'm quitting, here's my audio log resignation, and then he left. I don't think he went through the proper channels. But he's been through quite a lot. The general that writes to the Chancellor mentions that he's been in the Alplia 4 defense, the Garden Campaign, the Ikuni Repulsion Conflict, the defense of Menek B, Menek Bravo, as I mentioned earlier, evacuation of Etra, Battle of Jannar, the support liaison during the Generate Civil War, and the Battle of Cordex. Ghalt has seen a lot of battle in his 37 years. or not 37. He's been over 36 years, so 36, 37 years of service in the UPR, and he has seen a lot, he's done a lot, and he knows what he's doing. He's a guy who leads from the front, and he's definitely a great character and personality to be behind. You know, he's definitely someone you want as, you know, your team leader, your motivator, your spiritual leader, however you want to term it. He's definitely someone you want to give you that little pep talk right before you go out and kick some ass. That's the kind of role that Ghalt serves now. He's not so much fighting on the front lines with all the other, you know, Battleborn. He's more kind of in the back, but he's seen quite a lot, and he can definitely get out there on the front lines and mix it up no problem. And that's really all I've got for Ghalt. It's pretty straightforward. It's just mostly a service record of everything that he's ever done, and the fact that he needs to unite all the factions that are remaining in order to fight off the Varelsi and save Solus the Last Star. That's really all there is to his backstory and lore. And now we're going to go into his Helix loadout, and I'm going to show you my loadout for Ghalt and how things have changed. Alright, so right off the bat, level 1, I like to go with Stealth Scrap. Cloaking my scrap traps, making them virtually invisible at a long distance, is so important. So many times I myself have run over a scrap trap because all of a sudden, like, once you get close enough, you can kind of see it camouflaged on the ground, but you're looking up and kind of in the distance at enemy Battleborn or turrets or stuff like that. You're not always looking right at your feet. So when you get right next to it, yes, you can definitely see it. It's kind of like the camouflage from like the Predator movies, but even still, this stealth scrap traps are cloaking your scrap traps is so useful because if you don't, enemies are easily going to see it and they're going to destroy it, and you cannot afford to do that. You cannot afford to let your scrap traps be destroyed when playing as Ghalt. Next up, level 2, I like to go with Shock Trap. The additional damage from a little something extra and the scrapping, I don't really notice it all that much. I'd rather take the surefire damage of 60 damage per second, and since they're stunned for 2 seconds, you know, that's an additional 120 damage. It's something, it's better. It's a definite, it's a finite amount of damage. You're definitely going to see a difference, even if it's not all that much, whereas a little something extra and the scrapping, I myself just have not noticed a difference when using those perks. So I like to go with Shock Trap for level 2. Now level 3, I mentioned just before coming to this segment that there was a change. Level 3 for Ghalt changed. If you notice in the Helix menu initially, during the footage, you might have noticed for level 3 there was something for slug rounds, but they replaced the slug rounds with barrier. I don't know why, I didn't do the research on that, but all I know is barrier is now the new level 3 left-sided Helix augment, and Pellet Party is still the same, you know, it's the other level 3. So right off the bat for level 3, you can go with either one, it's up to you. I always go with Pellet Party just because I like more pellets, and it means that I hit my opponents easier, especially at range, because you're going to need all the damage you can get at range. The barrier augment it's good, I'm not going to lie, it's definitely useful. An additional 240 shield strength, that almost doubles what Ghalt initially has. It's excellent. You can go with that instead if you feel like you need it. Next up, level 4, I like to go with the hooks, you know, in plural form. The hook fires 3. The hook, Ghalt's hook travels very slow, but in using efficient extraction isn't really all that useful. Now the range can really catch people off guard. People might not expect that range, but it travels so slow people can just easily sidestep it even with a 35% speed increase with efficient extraction. So I go with the mutation in the hooks. That way, if I'm at relatively close range and my opponent tries to sidestep, they might accidentally walk into one of my other 2 hooks because it fires out like a trident from Ghalt's position. So it's pretty useful there. I definitely like the level 4 mutation, the hooks, for level 4. Next up, level 5. I like to go with Hobbling Shift, adding slow enemies for a brief second on the tactical shells. So they get 2 seconds of slow duration for the tactical shells. Now that is the last 4 shells of every magazine, I guess you could say, of Ghalt's revolver shotgun. So not only do they now do 25% bonus damage, but each blast will also inflict slow status for 2 seconds. Very useful for Ghalt. The boomsticker, you know, tactical bonus damage of increased 15% isn't worth it. If it increased it by like 50%, that might be worth it, but I prefer slow just because it prevents them from getting away and it allows me to pummel them continuously and try and finish them off. Next up, level 6. I like to go with Drain Chain. While an enemy is hit with hook, their shields and health are drained. It just pretty much gets rid of their regular 300 health shield and a little bit of damage, so it makes it easier for them to die. They die sooner. You can't really complain with that. Doubling the scrap trap health would only be beneficial if the scrap trap wasn't cloaked and if enemies were constantly trying to destroy it. But you know, since we're cloaking it, we don't need to worry about duct tape and baling wire. We want to go with drain chain. Next up, level 7. Sorry. I like to go with scrap stack, increasing the number of scrap traps that can be active on the field. Ghalt starts off with 2. If this doubles it to 4, this means you can lay out so many traps and choke points and stuff like that. This is extremely useful. If you don't have scrap stack as an option, you can definitely go with speed loader. Speed loader, increasing the revolver reload speed, absolutely more preferable. I don't like both barrels blazing just because, yeah, you fire 2 rounds, so instead of firing 8 rounds and then you reload, you fire 4 and it's firing 2 at a time. But the rate of fire, I notice a significant drop off with the rate of fire. I don't like that. So I go with speed loader. That way I can fire my gun faster and I reload faster. You can't complain with that if you don't have scrap stack. If you do have scrap stack as an option, go with that. Next up, level 8. I like to go with quick and dirty. Once again, this mutation is awesome, allowing us to use scrap trap more often, since that is the entirety of Ghalt's entire game plan on the field. You know, short fuse really doesn't do all that much for me, and neither does big trap. A big trap actually can, you know, increasing the radius. So if you don't have quick and dirty, go with big trap. That way you can stun opponents easier. Next up, level 9. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. Next up, level 9, I like to go with easy target. Hooked enemies take amplified damage. An extra 15% damage for 5 seconds. That means damage, and that's just any type of damage, not just damage from Ghalt's shotgun. It's damage from his scrap trap, from the shotgun, from other enemies, from, you know, your teammates as well. Easy target, just that is punishing for an opponent to get hooked into. If they get hooked and they're thrown into a scrap trap while Ghalt is shooting them, and and one of your teammates is pummeling them as well, odds are they're gonna die. Even the larger health enemies like Kelvin, even they can die really quick with easy target amplifying all the damage they take for the next 5 seconds. That is brutal. Next up, level 10, the final one. I like to go with incendiary shells just because every single time you hit them, they'll take an additional 36 damage over 1.5 seconds. But you're firing, you know, with 2 guns at a really high rate. That means that every time it hits them, they take more and more and more and more burn damage. Very useful. I definitely prefer that over gun and run and can't touch this. They're just not all that great for me. You know, it's just whatever. You know, the additional movement speed is great because it's not temporary. It seems to be permanent. But I've never noticed. But like if you die, you know, it's like, oh well, too bad, you're done. So I prefer incendiary shells over can't touch this and gun and run. And that's my Helix loadout for Ghalt. I've had reasonable levels of success with this, but we're going to get into his tips and tricks that I have found to use him effectively on the battlefield and explain why I'm not too thrilled about him playing as him. Okay, so right off the bat for equipment and gear, I would say the first item you want to use is a magazine to increase his reload speed. Ghalt has a somewhat slow reload speed, and you're definitely going to want to modify that. Second piece of gear is an energy drink, something to increase his sprint speed. Ghalt runs very slow. You need to find a way to compensate from that. Otherwise, Ghalt will have a difficult time getting anywhere in a timely manner. Third item I would use is the UPR Synchronograph, which is Ghalt's special item that you get for completing his lore. It reduces his cooldown time, it increases his skill damage, and enemies that are hooked into a scrap trap take 25% extra damage from the trap itself. Not from everything. Not from all incoming and damage sources, it's just the extra 25% from the trap itself. But even still, Ghalt is definitely going to need that. He needs to be able to increase his damage. And as you can see right here, Ghalt's slow speed definitely costs me so much. This next bit of gameplay you see is all of my positives and negatives, and the good and the bad that I have with Ghalt. Ghalt definitely is lacking in a few areas. He's terrible at long range. He's absolutely terrible, right? You know, this is about as that's about as far right there, you know, as you want to get. But this, you know, you have to close the gap, and you are 100% reliant on his scrap traps. As you can no doubt see right here, it takes several of us for me to get the killing blow with Arendi right here. It takes several of us. But in a one-on-one scenario, if I'm just using Galt's shotgun, I have a miserable time. So I have to use the scrap traps, like no doubt right here. It ambushes opponents, and because it's invisible, people are going to run into it constantly. Ghalt is all about using his scrap traps, creating a good setup, throwing them in choke points, ambushing opponents. Pulling opponents into the scrap trap is excellent, and in a heated battle, you're going to have to be proficient with throwing down a scrap trap and then immediately hooking afterwards to try and catch a moving enemy who doesn't want to fall into the trap. It's very difficult. Ghalt has a high learning curve, in my opinion, and he's not all that fun because I don't like the fact that he's so reliant on the scrap traps. Like, Benedict is reliant on his rockets, absolutely, but Benedict really can't be countered directly. Ghalt can be countered by simply destroying his scrap traps. You do that, and Ghalt is going to struggle to get kills with just his shotgun solo one-on-one in battles. In a two-on-one scenario, Ghalt is incredibly weak and vulnerable. Avoid two-on-one conflicts whenever you can. Stay close to your teammates as often as you can. Put them on choke points, put them on objectives, put them in lanes where you know enemies are going to go through high traffic areas. You'll want to bait and attack enemies, catch them off guard, pull them to you, kind of bait them into your position, and just catch them off guard to the point where they can't really escape. You know, Galt's ultimate is pretty good against the larger enemies like Kelvin and Montana and Atticus, but against the smaller enemies, his ultimate, I don't like it. It's one of my least favorite ultimates in the game. I just have a hard time landing hits on regular-sized enemies. Now, pretty much that's all I've got with Ghalt in terms of the best tips on how to use them. You're reliant on those scrap traps 100% of the way. 100% of the way you are reliant on his scrap traps. If they get destroyed, you're going to have to reposition, reset, and set everything up. Ghalt is all about setups with his scrap traps and controlling lanes and choke points. And once he gets a good establishment, like if you're on a good team, Ghalt does amazing. But if you're on a bad team that gets pushed around and you're constantly fending for yourself and your traps are getting destroyed and you're facing good opponents who know what they're doing, you're going to have a miserable time with Ghalt. I sure as hell have. But pick your opponents off from a good, reasonable spot with the hook, pull them into your scrap trap, let your opponents distract them and weaken them, then you pull them in, finish them off, and that's all there is to it. Galt's fairly straightforward once you understand how to approach battles with him, and you can put up good numbers with him. You just have to be patient. And that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, subscribe, and I'll see you guys all later. This is RadTech Shoe, signing off.